Welcome back, everyone. Next up, we have Acurx Pharmaceuticals, trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol ACXP, and is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company focused on developing an entirely new class of antibiotics for difficult to treat infections. I would like to introduce David Luci, co-founder, president, and CEO of Acurx Pharmaceuticals. David is a serial entrepreneur who has co-founded or joined at the early stage of 3 biopharmaceutical companies prior to starting Acurx, all of which have been sold successfully, including the sale of BioEnvision to Sanofi in 2007, the sale of Macrochem Corp to Abena, I'm going to say that correctly, hopefully, Therapeutics, Inc., and the sale of Dipexium Pharmaceuticals to PLX Pharma, Inc. Now, David has also raised over $220 million in equity offerings during his tenure in drug development and is an M&A and corporate securities attorney from Paul Hastings and CPA in the healthcare practice group of Ernst & Young as vocational background. So let's welcome David Luci. How are you doing this morning, David?
I'm great, Anna. It's great to talk to you, and thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Yes, take it away.
Very good. As background, I started my career, as Anna suggested, as an accountant and corporate lawyer, buying and selling companies and raising capital for clients from my position as a corporate lawyer at Battle Fowler, a full-service law firm in Midtown Manhattan, which was then acquired by Paul Hastings about 20 years ago. In that endeavor, with each closing, wealthy people got wealthier. And I, shortly after the acquisition of Battle Fowler by Paul Hastings, I went to join a client's company called BioEnvision, which was a startup oncology drug development company developing a childhood leukemia drug for kids on palliative care with 7 weeks to live on average. And we were able to get that drug approved for children with leukemia, and 35% of kids with nothing left to try ended up becoming leukemia-free and living a full and healthy life. So my takeaway from that experience was I could leave the world a better place than where I found it by using my energies and resource to develop these life-saving therapies. And since then, I've been developing antibiotics with our chairman, Bob DeLucia, and our team ever since about 2007. And we're continuing that practice right now. So our primary business plan in these endeavors, including Acurx, is focused on bridging the gap between scientific innovators on the one hand and big pharma on the other hand by acquiring, financing, developing, and essentially, quote unquote, de-risking these potentially life-saving and often unnoticed early stage assets prior to a point in time when big pharma is interested in them because they haven't yet established proof of principle in man. So our plan continues, our business model continues with Acurx. We've used it successfully 3 times thus far. And we're currently in a late stage clinical trial at Acurx, phase 2B, in C. difficile infection. And we're hoping to wrap that up sometime very soon and announce the data and potentially move on to the next company. Anna?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, David. Are you ready for me for the questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, sure. So let's talk about your lead antibiotic candidate. How do you pronounce this?
Ibezapolstat.
Ibezapolstat. Thank you for that. So it's currently in phase 2 clinical trial treating patients with C. difficile infection. So what value infection points, if any, are upcoming during this year?
So we're currently evaluating based on the blinded observed data in the 2B trial, which is set up as 64 patients, one-to-one randomized, 32 patients in each arm, with our drug in one arm, ibezapolstat, and standard of care oral vancomycin in the other arm. based on the blinded observed data that we see, our team is really excited that we may be able to establish statistical non-inferiority prior to enrolling the full set of the originally designated 64 patients. So what we're planning to do is petition the FDA to conduct an interim analysis of the data. And we are hoping to report on that in March in a press release and discuss with our shareholders exactly what we've done at the annual, March earnings call, which would be sometime around March 15th to 20th. And procedurally, that will be a press release announcing how many patients we've enrolled thus far and announcing if, in fact, we're able to take an interim look at the data. From that point in time, we would expect by mid-year to be able to have the last patient enrolled that we need to enroll to unblind the data and then report the top-line results on the primary and secondary endpoint. And we would expect, or we would hope, subject to the vagaries of clinical trial enrollment during COVID times, that by mid-year we could have all of that completed. And at that point in time, our newly assembled independent data monitoring committee will give us a recommendation on whether or not to continue enrolling or alternatively to early terminate the phase 2B trial due to clinical success establishing non-inferiority and moving on by their recommendation to phase 3. And we're working with blinded observed data at this point. So we won't know which of those two directions we'll be able to go. And we certainly will take the advice of our independent data monitoring committee, as well as the FDA, before finalizing our determinations. But in all cases, we hope to have all of what I've just talked about kind of completed by mid-year.
Great. And David, can you help us see the competitive landscape for C. difficile, both with regard to currently marketed antibiotics and other therapies in development?
Absolutely. That's a really good question because the market is expected over the next few years to grow from about 1.3 billion to 1.7 billion. Currently, oral vancomycin is the standard of care, although folks that are on our scientific advisory board suggest the next drug that's approved to treat C. difficile will likely mean the end of recommending oral vancomycin as a therapy for C. diff under the IDSA Infectious Disease Society of America treatment guidelines, which would leave only Difficid or fidaxomicin, which is the Merck product that's too expensive. It's $4,800 currently for a full course of treatment. So is largely used, in our understanding, last line. And those are the only two. The reason why it's a great question is because just yesterday, Finch Therapeutics announced the failure of its phase 3 and firing 95% of their staff. They were attempting something for C. diff. Sanofi and Pfizer both tried vaccines as frontline therapy, both failed. And also, relatively recently, Summit Therapeutics failed its phase 3. So the landscape is relatively clear for us. And if and to the extent that we continue to show data like you see here in the bottom row, 100% cures and 100% sustained cures, we would clearly be a candidate for frontline therapy and a very weak indication for medicine.
So why do you feel ibezapolstat could achieve frontline treatment status?
Well, because our cure rates from the phase 2A trial and what we're seeing in the blinded observed data, so far we're looking at 100% cures at end of treatment with no reinfections. And, that kind of data is unseen in the C. diff landscape thus far. So if we can just even keep 90% and 90% instead of 100 and 100, we would be in great shape. The second dimension for our product is that we're restoring the healthy microbiome while patients are on our antibiotic, which is highly unusual. Most antibiotics, like oral vancomycin, the standard of care, decimate your healthy microbiome while you're on the medicine. And that is what leads to reinfection in the case of oral vancomycin 30% of the time. So by restoring the healthy microbiome, we think our patients are more likely to not be reinfected. And we think that's showing up in our data.
That's good news. Talk a little bit about the market size and how it's evolving.
So the market, 1.3 billion currently, is growing. In a few years' time, it will be 1.7 billion. And frontline therapy, should be able to clear at least a third or 40% of that. The reason it's increasing is because of antimicrobial resistance, often called the next pandemic, because it's been heightened by COVID. Because of the overuse of antibiotics, bacteria, including C. diff bacteria, is becoming more easily able to morph its properties to avoid being killed by existing antibiotics that have been approved for so many decades, like the standard of care for C. diff, oral vancomycin. It's been on the market 65 years. So it's a fertile ground. You could see why Pfizer and Sanofi were trying to develop a vaccine to be frontline in C. diff, because it's such a major market. And when you have a standard of care or oral vancomycin that it cures about 85% of the patients that are using it, but has a 30% reinfection rate and it's life-threatening, you could see why somebody would identify that as a vulnerable frontline therapy.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about your FDA designations for both QIDP and Fast Track. What benefits do they provide?
So the QIDP is Qualified Infectious Disease Product. That's a designation under the GAIN Act, which was approved several years ago. And it provides 5 years of market exclusivity that runs alongside your patents. And it's only available for antibiotics that treat serious or life-threatening infection. So that's really important for us. And the Fast Track designation basically means that the FDA is very cooperative with us, and they've been great. And we're really proud of the relationship we've developed with FDA, and we hope to continue that in the future. But in addition to that, we get 5 years of market exclusivity for being a new chemical entity. You see, because Anna, we're a brand new class of antibiotics. So it's not like penicillin and then the next generation amoxicillin and that sort of thing, where you're just kind of putting a new cluster of atoms on the molecule. We're actually a brand new class of antibiotics. So we get an additional 5 years of market exclusivity for that. So aside from our patent portfolio, we know that we'll have 10 years of market exclusivity from the day that we get FDA approval, should we get FDA approval. So, we're going to take our time, and we don't have to worry about, patent protection, and we'll exploit the commercial potential of our drug in due course with a guaranteed 10 years exclusivity.
Great. Can you tell us about the Pasteur Act, and if this legislation is passed into law, how will it affect your business?
Yes, certainly. So in rough numbers, what I would say is, if the Pasteur Act is passed and we were designated as qualifying as a critical need antimicrobial by Health and Human Services, that would really kind of double our market value. The Pasteur Act is available for incubator companies like ours, that sponsors that have a new class of antibiotics that treat serious or life-threatening infections, like us with our QIDP. So it is tailor-made for us, in my opinion. What they would do, the federal government would stockpile your drug at public health facilities every year for free under a license agreement with the sponsor, in our case, Acurx, and they would pay for our phase 3 clinical program, along with pay us between $750 million and $3 billion over the 10-year marketing period. So that would be based on a pharmacoeconomic buildup of the value of having our drug available in the U.S. Over a 10-year period. And that determination is made by HHS based on what they see, given our data, how much money will our drug being approved save the public health system over 10 years. So even if we were to get the minimum of $75 million a year for 10 years, that's guaranteed money. It's on the side of whatever your sales and marketing infrastructure is able to do. And it just accelerates everything. It kind of puts the antibiotics market, kind of back in line with other areas of medicine that are not as neglected as antibiotics, like oncology and diabetes.
So what else is in the Acurx product pipeline behind your lead antibiotic candidate?
So our second antibiotic candidate is ACX375C. It's an internal medicine, oral, and will be IV, that targets the treatment of patients with MRSA infections, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. Still 52% of all hospital-acquired infections in the U.S. So we're quite excited about it. We think we're having a breakthrough currently with a couple of the new molecules in our lead optimization process. And we have applied and are in the second round of consideration for a CARB-X non-dilutive grant for that drug, which if we get the grant, it'll pay for the program for a 5-year period of time, $17 million program, of which 11 or 12 million would be paid for by CARB-X. So we'll know in April if we're going to get that.
We have a question from Matt McLaughlin. Do you expect ACX362E to already have broad spectrum efficacy for low GC gram pathogens as is, or do you expect to further develop variants of ACX362E for this purpose?
No, it's a very narrow spectrum antibiotic, and there won't be any variants of the drug. It's currently working beautifully. The toxicity profile is great. There's no serious adverse events. The only thing that we will do with ACX362E or ibezapolstat going into phase 3 is to scale up the manufacturing process. The cost of goods is currently less than 10% of what we anticipate as a retail price, which retail price would be thousands of dollars lower than Merck's fidaxomicin. And we're real comfortable with that, but we don't need to change the molecule at all.
So a follow-up question from him, would further variants require a new FDA new drug application?
I think that would depend on the variants. We don't envision doing that with ACX362E. It may require a new application. It may just need a bridging study. If we were going down that road, we'd have to look at that. It may depend on, how different the variant would be. But because we've been successful thus far and the data looks so good, it's not something that we've had to consider.
We have a couple questions from Zach Troilo. How far along is phase 2B?
So we're going to come out with an exact number, I suspect, in the first half of March. It's coming along fairly well. And, we hope to have the enrollment completed by the middle of the year and data announced if we're able to early terminate the 2B like we did with the 2A. So it would be unfair to say, yeah, we're at 28 patients now out of 62 because, there's a fairly significant likelihood that we're not going to see, or 64, we're not going to see 64 patients. We early terminated the 2A, and the data is looking as consistent as the 2A. So I don't think we're going to have to do 64. So if you assume we're going to end this study at 36, we're kind of almost there.
And how quickly can phase 3 start?
That will take a lot of time. I would say first half of 24. And that's because we have to get the final data into a final study report, convene a meeting with the FDA to negotiate and finalize the phase 3 design. And then we have to take our 28 trial centers, get them all loaded with drug supply, and add another 95 trial centers. So it's a process. It's probably, I'd say, March, April 24.
And can you comment on any discussions with potential manufacturing partners?
Well, we're manufacturing right now with an international manufacturer called Pyramel, and we will have a backup manufacturer in place by the time we start phase 3. And all of our manufacturing will be conducted in the U.S.
Okay. And do you have any plans for going outside the USA?
Well, we have partnering discussions outside the USA currently and have had over the past year or two. But for manufacturing, with the COVID pandemic and whatnot, and with the PASTEUR Act in mind, folks are attempting to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. So that we could have antibiotic independence for life-saving drugs without having to rely on other nations who we may or may not be getting along with at any point in time.
Sebastian Fernandez says the phase 2B trial is behind schedule. You've opened up more trial sites to address this issue. So in the interest of investor transparency, please provide us with an estimate of how many patients have been enrolled. Back in September of 2022, you said that the trial was at least 25% enrolled. Is the trial now at least 30% or 40%?
It's hard to say what percent enrolled it is because, our intention is to early terminate the trial at 36 patients. So I don't know what the denominator is. It's certainly not 25. It's over 30, probably 40. It's significant. But we've added a lot of trial centers, as he points out, going from the beginning of 8 up to 28 in order to, course correct for the COVID pandemic, which across the board is impacting enrollment for, every company that I know of. And we're certainly no exception to that. But just like with the phase 2A trial, we think that we'll be able to, get back some of our time on, perceived delays by early terminating the trial due to success.
Okay. And are there some additional testing sites expected to open soon?
No. And maybe that's your best evidence for, we're almost done. No, we're not. We're at 28. We're not going beyond 28 until we start phase 3.
And talk a little bit on the ACX 375C and when you plan the phase 1 trial, when might that start? And what market value do you feel might be placed on this product if successful? You talked about it before, but let's go over that one more time for our viewers.
Certainly. So it's a phase 3 that we would be starting in the first half of 24. Okay. If we get to phase 3, we think that the discount rate used by finance community types will decrease. And we see this as much like Pfizer did when they were trying a vaccine as frontline therapy. We see it as $1 billion a year peak sales product in the U.S. alone. So that's where we see the product potential. Now that of course would be discounted using a time value of money and discount rate, at every phase of our development. But I can say that in an up market, stock market, one of our recent competitors that has fallen away now, Summit Therapeutics, they reported mediocre phase 2 data, and on the NASDAQ, their market cap shot up to $225 million at the time. So I don't know, in a bad market like we're in now, if when we report our data, which I think will be a lot better than Summit's data, when we report it in a bad market, will we get to 225 million or more? Maybe, maybe not, but it's going to be a lot more than, 40, 45 million where we are.
Jim Sutton wants you to talk a little bit about the end game. Are you looking for a buyout by a major, or are you looking to commercialize? And if a buyout is a play, which majors would fit best with your products?
So, when you run these kind of incubator companies, one of the tricks is it's kind of like real estate. You can't fall in love with one strategy or another if you want to maximize your outcomes. You have to throw everything you have against the wall, and that's what we do. So yes, our business model is to de-risk this asset in phase 2, find a partner, and go from there, a big pharma partner, and then go from there, and then find other unnoticed antibiotics in the future that we could develop, and put a company around and use our efforts to kind of get that through proof of principle in man and attractive to big pharma. Having said that, you can't count on the other side. You're only one party in a two-party relationship. So we do have a significant experienced team of folks who have taken antibiotics out successfully and marketed them. If we have to go that route, it's plan B, but we would do that with a contract sales organization with leadership in sales and marketing working directly for us, but offloading as a one-product company in terms of commercialization, we would offload the sales and marketing details to the CSO. So in terms of who would want to come out and look at us, if you look at the AMRactionFund.com website, the sponsors of the AMR Action Fund, big pharma sponsors, and there's about 24 of them, broadly speaking, that's the group of folks who would, in our view, be the most likely candidates to have interest. So that list includes Pfizer and Merck and Roche and Johnson & Johnson, firms like that, GSK. I will say that Merck is particularly interesting because they will have, if oral vancomycin is no longer recommended for C. diff, Merck will have the only other approved drug to treat C. diff that's recommended by the IDSA, that being Difficid. And as I understand it, Difficid goes off patent in mid-27. So they would have almost uniquely the experience and the team already assembled to kind of pop Difficid off the truck and pop our drug onto the truck. So it would seem to be very efficient for them.
And we've got 2 questions, our last questions from Alan B. Talk about any obstacles that are in your way, and let's end on a happy note. What milestones should we look for Acurx?
So the key obstacle in our way is the rate of enrollment. That's the thing that is kind of on our mind every day, that we're attacking in different ways, and we've identified in our several earnings calls over the past quarters as things that we've done a number of things to work on. In terms of milestones, as we come up, we'll have the procedural press release in the first half of March, I suggest, on the ibezapolstat plan to completion, which I think will be really good. It will include the number of patients that we have currently enrolled exactly. And then in April, if we are able to get the CARB-X grant for ACX 375, we understand that the deadline for a decision by CARB-X is April 10th. And then after that, it's negotiation of an agreement between the parties. So we think in April, we'll have we could have a very nice press release there and announce that we're non-dilutively getting, kind of over $1 a share over a 5-year period of time. And it kind of puts our second drug, the MRSA drug, on autopilot for a 5-year period.
Wonderful. Well, if you have any closing remarks for our viewers.
Well, we're very appreciative of our shareholders and their patience. And we think for a $40 million market cap company, by the middle of the year, we're going to have something special that we're going to be able to report.
Wonderful. Well, great presentation. Great stuff you're working on. Thank you so much for joining us, David, and come back in the near future with some updates.
Thank you, Anna. Will do.
All right. Okay, everyone, stay with us. We'll be right back with our next presenter.